Welcome to More Than a Conversation, the podcast where we meet and have discussions with some of the most interesting people and innovative leaders in their fields from all walks of life. We will be discussing everything from politics to theology to religion to philosophy to life. Every once in a while, I may just be on here talking about whatever's in the news and whatever I think will be of interest to you. This is your host, Patrick Connolly, and I hope that today will be more than a conversation for you. Welcome to More Than a Conversation. This is your host, Patrick Connolly, and today, guys, I am joined by someone that I had the pleasure of meeting not long ago, and when we met, I was able to learn and grow and gain some knowledge about issues that, if I'm like many of you, I think maybe we don't think about on a daily basis. Today, I am joined by E.J. Kimball. Now, E.J. serves as Director of Christian Outreach and Engagement for the Combat Antisemitism movement. He is a foreign policy and national security consultant with 15 years of experience working in Washington, D.C., and thus far, it hasn't messed him up too bad. He is the president of EJK Strategies, a national security consulting firm specializing in government relations and building strategic alliances. He has also served as the director of U.S. operation for the Israel Allies Foundation, where he built a niche pro-Israel organization into the go-to resource on Capitol Hill for pro-Israel and Middle East policy. So he has a wealth of knowledge that we're hoping to tap into today. He's also served as a foreign policy counsel to a U.S. Congresswoman and was the staff director for the Congressional Anti-Terrorism Caucus. We could go on and on with his merits and accolades, but we are excited to have him with us today. EJ, thank you for taking the time to join me today.
Well, thank you, Patrick, and great to be here, and appreciated that introduction. That was great. You can be my PR man.
If you're hiring, I might have some time if I can do remote work. That being said, I don't have. I've got enough trouble to deal with without trying to reside that close to the Capitol there. So
don't blame you. Don't blame you.
EJ, you're joining me today. In fact, the Combat Antisemitism movement, we're going to jump into that pretty quickly because you have so much information to share, and I think it's very important. Tell me a little bit about the Combat Antisemitism movement.
Sure. The Combat Antisemitism movement, as the name says, we are a movement. We're a movement of organizations and individuals that has come together over about 4.5 years. The organization started in February 2019. And the goal of this organization is to be unique in the space of fighting anti-Semitism. There are many groups that fight anti-Semitism. They're popping up left and right. Unfortunately, they're popping up left and right because the problem continues to get worse. And there are legacy organizations that have been around for years that have been fighting anti-Semitism. But the Combat Antisemitism movement began to figure out new creative ways of dealing with the world's oldest hatred. And we decided that we would focus on a few areas initially. We wanted to focus on serving as almost like a networking agent for all of the groups that are working on these issues to help connect them. There's a lot of small groups that don't have a lot of resources where we can help connect them with other groups to amplify their work. If they need someone to do PR and you've got a firm that's specializing in the PR side, or they're looking at college campuses but have spent most of their time focused on federal policy. These are ways that we don't need to recreate the wheel and have overlap in fighting anti-Semitism. We can work together. And so that was one of the main areas. The other aspect of our work is being creative in filling the gaps, really more importantly, identifying the gaps and then filling those gaps. So I would say one of the most important initiatives that we launched happened during the pandemic with our first global mayors summit, which brought mayors from all over the world, from big cities like London, Berlin, Los Angeles, to small cities. And it was a great opportunity for mayors from around the world to meet each other, obviously virtually, and have discussions and learn from each other about how anti-Semitism is being fought in different cities around the world, and seeing how some of those lessons might be applicable in their own countries, in their own states, in their own cities. And that has grown into, we had our second summit back in November. It was in Athens. The mayor of New York City flew over to receive an award there for his efforts in fighting anti-Semitism. And we have grown this initiative, not just for us to run it, but for the mayors to be working with each other, that we don't have to hold their hands. And that's the goal. We don't want to do it all, but we want to help empower those that can to do it.
Okay, so when you start talking about combating anti-Semitism, there are people right now listening who go, what do you mean? EJ, all right, there you can see over my shoulder is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. We're familiar with the terrible atrocity that occurred with the Holocaust. We recognize that. And, obviously this is not my position, but to a lot of people, they don't even understand the concept that there still is anti-Semitism occurring. Do you encounter that a lot in your work? Just people going, well, we don't see this, or what's happening, or is this really a problem? Do you get a lot of that question or that pushback with people that just don't know, maybe not necessarily that are against the concept of stopping anti-Semitism, but that go, I don't know if that's really happening?
Well, first, let me thank you for having me on to talk about this, because if you're talking to American Jews, by and large, we recognize anti-Semitism because we're the ones that experience it. And whether it's someone making a snide comment or a more physical manifestation of anti-Semitism, almost all Jews have seen it, experienced it, or certainly recognize when and where it's happening. But there's a large portion, as you say, that you may hear about it, but seeing is believing, hearing is not believing. And you need to be looking and hearing things with the right lens to understand anti-Semitism today. Because as you mentioned, sure, the Holocaust, that people recognize, killing of Jews, that's, anti-Semitism.
Anti-Semitic.
Right. You're killing Jews for no other reason than they're Jews. But there are other forms of anti-Semitism that manifest that you might not recognize just because you see it. And you and I discussed this when we met. There's a definition, a working definition of anti-Semitism that was put together in conjunction with legal experts, historical experts, countries, about 31 countries, to define anti-Semitism today. And it's called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, Working Definition of Anti-Semitism. And that working definition, aside from laying out the definition itself, it includes 11 contemporary examples of anti-Semitism. And that's really the key part today to understand anti-Semitism, because historically, during the times of the Holocaust and before, the anti-Semitism towards Jews was just that. It was towards Jews. The problems that a country had were because of the Jews that lived amongst them. Those are our problems. It's because of the Jews here. So if we just got rid of the Jews, we get rid of our problems. So we can destroy Jewish businesses. We can beat Jews in the streets. We can restrict Jews' access to employment. because they're the problem. After 1948, with the reestablishment of the Jewish state, anti-Semitism began to shift away from the Jews living amongst us. Well, not just that, it's still there, but a new manifestation towards the Jewish state living amongst us as the family of nations. The problems we have in the world today are because of Israel, the Jewish state.
And I want to circle back and come back to the state of Israel amongst the family, if you will, of states, as you just put that. Because I do think that's important for us to talk about. I do want to talk a little bit before we do that about this working definition to maybe help people understand a little more of what it means to be anti-Semitic and what and ways that manifests. I do wonder, though, I'm having this conversation with you. In fact, I'm having this conversation with you in this, I believe, is a special month for our Jewish citizens here in the United States, correct?
That's correct. May is Jewish American Heritage Month, which was proclaimed by Congress in 2006 to celebrate the contributions of Jewish Americans to our country and to our success as a country. And with the Combat Antisemitism movement, what we are focusing on this month is the second part of that proclamation, aside from recognizing this month, is calling upon states and local governments and the American people to issue proclamations and to celebrate the contributions of Jewish Americans. And so we've been working all across the country to have states and mayors declare through proclamations in recognizing Jewish American Heritage Month. And the importance, it's less to me about the actual proclamation. The importance is the fact that it's being done and that people hear about it and they're aware. Because if you are on Netflix, if you're on Amazon Prime, I was just on a flight on Southwest Airlines and I was looking at the movies. What comes up right at the beginning? May is also Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Now that was front and center. If you didn't know it, you did once you looked at it. There's no mention of Jewish American Heritage Month there. So it is so vitally important to let people know that it is Jewish American Heritage Month. And getting to the issue of anti-Semitism, it's an important thing, because how do you fight anti-Semitism? And my colleague and the former U.S. Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, Elon Carr, he talks about the way to fight anti-Semitism is not tolerance. Tolerance is not the opposite of anti-Semitism. That the opposite of hating Jews is not to tolerate Jews. It's to love Jews. Philo-Semitism. And that's the message that we're trying to get across, is tolerating the Jews living amongst us is not the way to fight anti-Semitism. That will only allow anti-Semitism to continue to flourish.
So, and maybe this is a loaded question, but we live in a world where everywhere we go, like right now, we're seeing that it is, I think it's Asian Pacific Islander, correct, is the celebration. And by all means, celebrate, any people group and their contributions to us. And in fact, as a nation, it's important for us to remember that we are perhaps the only nation on earth that is truly was founded upon the idea of people coming from different backgrounds and becoming one nation. And so I think it's important to celebrate that. But even as we talk about the fact that, there's a great list of great Jewish Americans that have helped shape our nation. So as we talk about the fact that month is not even mentioned, or we talk about the fact that so many people look over anti-Semitism in a world that is as awake, if you will, to grievance and to racism and to oppression and all of these things. How is it that where something you called the oldest hate in the world is overlooked? I mean, why do Jewish people not get that recognition as an oppressed people group unless you're talking to someone who represents a group that specifically deals with that? But in general, and I'm just saying this in general, despite being perhaps the most oppressed group of people that have ever walked the face of the earth, we don't hear that recognition. Why is that?
You're right. That is a loaded question. So I will try to be careful in how I respond to it. And I think, as you mentioned, it is very important to celebrate all the different groups that have come to this country that make our country so great. I mean, we are an experiment to the world. Can you bring people from all different cultures, ethnicities, all different walks of life, all to live together in one country with equal rights under the law? It's hard. And I think that's something that we see today. And when we have problems in our country, people like to talk about the divisiveness here because that sells. You know, it's a lot more newsworthy to talk about the problems in the country than the successes in the country. But there are a lot of successes in the country. And
Sure.
Looking at the contributions that Jewish Americans have made within the civil rights movement and helping to march with minority groups to ensure that they are treated equally is a very important part of history that, unfortunately, some are trying to blot out, trying to ignore, to dismiss, and to write off as something that never even happened. But the contributions that American Jews have made because of our historical position in the world, you know, being oppressed, living in a diaspora for 2,000 years. This is my opinion. I believe part of the reason that the Jewish people don't get the same sort of recognition in some ways, or not recognition, attention about anti-Semitism. Some of it is just because there is anti-Semitic bodies in the world that have those feelings, but that we do now have a state, the Jewish state of Israel, that is a very strong state, that without that Jewish state, the threats to the Jewish people would be even higher than they are today. The Israeli Defense Forces protects not just the Jews who live in Israel. They protect all the people that live in Israel, the Muslims that live in Israel, the Christians that live in Israel. They're protecting everyone when there's a terror attack. This country, the government of Israel, provides equal rights to all citizens living there, freedom of religion for everyone. If you ever walk through Jerusalem on a Friday afternoon, you will see Christians praying. You will see Muslims praying. You will see Jews praying. You will see Jews walk by Muslims and Muslims walk by Christians and Christians by Jews. And while people are praying, but just walking along as if nothing was happening. Yeah, there is a tolerance for others' religions. There is an acceptance that everyone can do what they believe and that they have a right to do it. And so having such a strong state, I think, is part of why we don't get the attention. But that does not replace the fact that the anti-Semitic attacks that are happening against Jews in the United States, in Europe, and around the world continues to grow. And that, in large part, is due to a failure to identify anti-Semitism in the modern world. If you don't mind, I wanted to touch, because you had brought it up, about how that IHRA, the IRA working definition, helps. It is a very important tool for law enforcement to be trained on, to understand that when there is a potential hate crime, to understand, based on those 11 contemporary examples, is what occurred potentially anti-Semitic? Because a lot of times you won't realize it. So if there's an attack in the streets of New York City and the person happens to be Jewish, that doesn't mean it was an anti-Semitic attack. It could have just been a random attack. That stuff happens. Did the attacker say something? Did the attacker say something like, "Go back to Israel, you Jew"? Because if that's the case, under the IRA working definition examples, what they are saying is that as a Jew, Jews in Israel are the same. That Jews in America have dual loyalty to Israel. That Jews are responsible, collectively responsible for actions of the Israeli government. Those sorts of activities would be anti-Semitic. Why? Because you're holding Jews to a standard that no one else is held to. When there's criticism of Israel, Israel, like any country, does things that there are lots of debates. In Israel, they have very strong debates. They're having debates over the judicial reform actions by the government. That's a healthy democracy, debating this. Now, when Israel, though, is held to a double standard by others in the world, when they're being criticized for actions that other countries take but are not criticized, that's when that criticism can rise to a level of anti-Semitism.
So one of the things that I see all the time, someone attacks, the United States, September 11th, a terrible attack. No one in the world had to stand up, get behind a microphone and say, the United States has a right to defend itself. No one did that. It just wasn't necessary to do. No one has to stand up and say Ukraine has a right to defend itself. But if Israel is attacked, then the going line is Israel has a right to defend itself. To me, that's a double standard. The fact that even has to be voiced, that, well, Israel has this right, as if it wouldn't be common sense, international law, just history. I mean, everything we understand about civilization is if a people are attacked, then their government has a right to take measures to defend its people. That's just one example. Can you provide some other examples, and maybe I'm off on that example? Tell me what you think about that, and then maybe you can help me with some other examples of how Israel gets a double standard.
Sure. Well, let me continue on that example, because you're 100% correct in the general ideas that sovereign countries, when they are being attacked, their sovereignty, their territorial integrity is being attacked. They have, under international law, not just the right, the obligation to protect their citizens, to fight back to protect their citizens. It's not a right, it's an obligation. It's an obligation that when we were attacked on 9/11, our government was obligated to go after our enemies. Otherwise, they're not doing their job as our government. That's their constitutional responsibility. The Israeli government has an obligation to its citizens. When Israel is being attacked, whether it is by Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, like we just saw the other week, whether it's from Hezbollah in Lebanon, whether it's Iran providing weapons and support to these organizations, to these terrorist organizations to carry out these attacks, that is an attack on Israel's territorial sovereignty, on its territorial integrity. It is the same as Russia attacking Ukraine. It is the same as Al-Qaeda attacking the United States. It is an attack on our sovereignty, right? That was an attack. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad was an attack on Israel's sovereignty. So they have an obligation to. And so you're right. When the world steps up and says Israel has a right to defend itself, well, obviously the intent is not to hold Israel to a double standard. You know, Republican and Democratic administrations, Republican and Democrat leadership in Congress always come out and say, Israel, we absolutely stand with Israel. She has a right to defend herself. But why is that always the default, right? It should be, we will do whatever we can to help our ally Israel in defeating her enemies. The problem we have is there are many people in the world who don't believe that there should be a Jewish state. And so when Israel starts fighting against her enemies, there's immediate calls for ceasefires. Now, of course, we don't want violence, but there's immediate calls for ceasefires. And what happens? A terrorist organization that the world has declared a terrorist organization continues to govern territory and to get ready for a future war. What Israel deals with with the Palestinian Authority is a leadership. We just saw this week. There was in Congress, there was an attempt in the House, which thankfully Speaker McCarthy stopped. But unfortunately, Senator Bernie Sanders gave Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib a platform to hold an event to commemorate what is called Nakba Day. Nakba is an Arabic word for catastrophe. The catastrophe that took place in 1948. Do you know what that catastrophe was?
The founding of the state of...
Yes. The failure of the 7 Arab armies to kill all the Jewish Israeli men, women, and children in the territory. That was the catastrophe.
Okay, now, so I missed this. Let me just clarify so we can make sure that everybody's got this. A United States congressperson was platformed by a United States senator. And the purpose of this was to recognize a day of mourning that, and maybe mourning might be the wrong word, but that's what it sounds like to me, that the Jewish state was not destroyed by way of killing all the Jewish people.
Right. Mourning would be, I would say, better than what it actually is about. It is not about mourning the fact that they lost that war, because they don't recognize that they lost that war. They're still fighting that war. The catastrophe is the fact that they did not succeed in killing all the Jews in Israel, that the Israeli state survived. And it's a call
so this
for
would be
recognition of that.
It'd be the equivalent of Nazis saying the day of catastrophe is the day that the concentration camps and killing camps were emptied. That was a catastrophe. That's what these people are saying, it sounds like to me.
Yeah. And not just as bad as that is, as bad as that was, at the UN, Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, spoke for over an hour as the UN recognized Nakba Day and just spit out anti-Semitic tropes for an hour in front of the United Nations General Assembly. And so when you talk about international organizations and you ask the question, why aren't Jews getting the same attention for the oppression that they faced? Well, when you've got the United Nations General Assembly, supposed to be the family of nations whose intent was to preserve peace and harmony in the world, giving a platform to an anti-Semite who seeks the destruction of the Jewish state, that may help inform on why we have this problem that we have today.
Hey, More Than a Conversation listeners, I hope that you are enjoying this conversation as much as I am, and I hope that you're getting something great out of it today. I'm just wanting to jump in here in the middle to take a moment and let you know a few ways that you can help out More Than a Conversation. First, wherever you're listening, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. That will definitely help, and that'll make sure that you get all the content. Also, if you have a way to rate, if your app allows you to give a 4-star, 5-star, whatever the rating is that's the top rating, I would so appreciate if you would go ahead and drop a rating there. That's how the aggregators and the distributors rank podcasts, and the higher the ranking you give, the more ears will be able to hear these great conversations. Thanks again, and I'm hoping that today has been more than a conversation for you. Now let's get back to it.
So
I see you're pained by that response.
Yeah, I'm I honestly don't think, and having this conversation, I don't think, and that's kind of the point of More Than a Conversation. It's why you guys keep listening, and I don't think most of us really realize how bad this is. And for me, I tend to kind of not listen to both sides on the extremes, and so sometimes you hear things and you go, okay, well, I don't know what they said, but it probably wasn't all as bad as that. But when I hear this, when I hear, Rashida Tlaib saying this, that's unacceptable. This is not a nation where that should be celebrated at all, or mentioned, or you should lose office, or there should be a repercussion for a person supporting such a thing. That's egregious. I'm just thinking of that. That's, I've accepted, I guess, that it seems that the UN is infatuated with hating and condemning Israel. Interestingly enough, if I were going to go to the Middle East and wanted to find a place to feel safe as a Christian, it would be Israel that I would go to. But Israel, I think, has had more slaps on the wrist and harsh words from the UN than probably any other nation in the Middle East, and in a region that includes Iran. I do have a question, though, as well. So Iran funding the enemies of Israel, Israel being an ally of the United States, it's interesting to me that we have had some administrations that seem very interested in not putting a stop to Iran's strength. If Iran continues to grow, and if Iran develops nuclear weapons, and if we don't get serious about Iran, what does that mean for Israel?
Yeah,
in your
well,
view?
and I promise after this that I will try to get a little more positive. It can be quite depressing talking about the gravity of the problem, but it is very important for people to really understand what is at stake here. And so your question about the Iranian regime, I think it's very simple. We need to take people at their word. When someone tells you something, you should believe what they say unless and until you can prove them wrong. Unless you can prove or you get information that they don't really mean what they say. The Iranians are very clear. Their goal is to wipe Israel off the map. So if Iran obtains the nuclear weapon capability, they will deploy it to destroy the Jewish state of Israel. It would be wiped off the map. That is their goal. So what's at stake here? Israel. World peace, security. And it's not just Israel that's threatened by Iran. And this is the part that, many people just like to focus on Israel, which, of course, the reason that we're talking today when it comes to anti-Semitism and the experience of Jews is if you're not a Jew, generally speaking, you don't experience it. So it's not as important naturally because it's not affecting you. Other countries are being threatened by Iran. Saudi Arabia is being threatened by Iran. The Abraham Accords that President Trump initiated between Israel, Morocco, Bahrain, the UAE, the fact that countries like Saudi Arabia are normalizing relations with Israel, that Oman is normalizing relations with Israel. Why are they doing that? In part, they have shared threats. Israel is not a threat to Saudi Arabia. Israel has no ambitions to attack Saudi Arabia. But you know who does? Iran. They have ambitions to attack Saudi Arabia and take over the two holiest sites in Islam, to take over Mecca and Medina. They have these objectives, and the world, the region is waking up to this threat. Europe is still slow to get on board, unfortunately. And if you've got a regime that's unwilling to negotiate in good faith and be part of a family of nations, it does not leave you with many choices. And of course, that makes people uncomfortable. So, when it comes to Israel and Iran, it is very clear to Israel what would happen if Iran gets this capability. And the Israelis are very publicly clear about it. They will not allow that to happen. And, at times the U.S. has been stronger in our response to support for whatever Israel feels is necessary. And at other times we take a more hands-off approach, or even worse, we work sort of against Israel in some respects by slowing down any potential response that they have against the Iranian regime. So it's a dangerous world, and if you've got an enemy that's declaring their intentions loud and clear of what they want to do to you, how long do you sit back and wait?
That's a valid question, and a question that any sovereign nation has the right to be able to decide for themselves within the bounds of treaties and international law and so on and so forth. And I think that is something that we ought to all be paying attention to, and how that our nation finds itself dealing with nations like Iran. Now,
Patrick, before you go on, I do want to also mention one other point here is, if Iran, or even, let's say, God forbid, North Korea, right, they've got a nuclear capability. If a nuclear weapon were detonated, God forbid, in the United States, our country would survive. It would not destroy our entire country. We're too big. Now, obviously, millions of people will die. Ramifications are going to be horrible. But as a country, we would still be here. If a nuclear weapon were detonated in Israel, it's gone. There's no more. It's not a big country. It's always compared to being about the size of New Jersey. I've been doing that drive through New Jersey up to New York a lot. And let me tell you, it's not that big. But that's Israel. You can travel Israel in a few hours. So, God forbid, a nuclear weapon were dropped there, it's game over. And that's why this issue for Israel takes even more importance than it does for the US, than it does for Europe, because it's not end of the world for us. It's a huge war that we're fighting, but we're still here. Israel's gone. It's about annihilation.
And I want to get into this list. And the reason I want to do that is I feel like one of the best ways for us to be positive, as you just mentioned, is to recognize the average person who's listening to this podcast. You're not going to get off the treadmill at the gym or get out of your car and go change the global geopolitical landscape. What you can do is change your next interaction, and you can change your next vote. You can change your next conversation with your senator or representative. You can change your next post on social media. You can do those things. And so I think it's important for us to understand what anti-Semitism is, and maybe even a little bit of what it is not. And so I would like to, if you're good with it, just go through some of these points quickly that are in the IHRA's definition, the contemporary definition of what anti-Semitism is, and then perhaps as we do that, we might be able to point out what it's also not saying. So in that list, and this is not an exhaustive list, but some ways to represent it, to understand. The first one is calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology or an extremist view of religion. That one seems fairly obvious.
Well, and that would be more of the classical anti-Semitism that people recognize. Nazis killing Jews, right? It's the physical and the calling for that type of anti-Semitic attacks. So yes, and before we go on, I do want to also make the point here that this working definition, while it's a non-legally binding definition, meaning this is not something that the world has said is the legal definition, but over 35 countries have adopted this definition. The United States Department of State, our State Department, has adopted this definition. Our Department of Education has adopted this definition. Many states in this country have adopted this definition. The United States as a whole, the Congress has not adopted this yet federally, but this is something that in the United States, the Biden administration, when they came in, stood by this definition of anti-Semitism as the gold standard definition, that they follow this definition. So this is it's not just this new definition that's out there. This is something that many countries around the world, allies of the United States and others, have adopted because they understand that it is necessary.
Gotcha. So that's important to recognize as we move forward. Making mendacious, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such, or the power of Jews as collective, such as, especially but not exclusively, the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy or of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, or other societal institutions.
Yeah, and this is another one of those sort of traditional anti-Semitic tropes of Jews being in control of the world, blaming Jews, or actually what ended up happening during the pandemic, blaming Israel for creating the COVID, the coronavirus, that somehow the Jews were responsible for this.
I've noticed a trend, and we talked about this a little bit the other day, but I've noticed a trend in conspiracy theories, and I kind of thought, to me anyway, and maybe it's my own fault for just assuming that by now people would dismiss things. I kind of thought the controlling Jewish cabal behind the scenes I kind of thought that trope was dead. I really did. But now with these latest round of conspiracy theories, and you mentioned COVID, I've seen a lot more of it. Now, I also want to explain something, and you can help me with this, but when you're speaking of a particular person who may be Jewish, and you may say, hey, I don't agree with their position, or I think that they are doing X, Y, Z, that is not the same as being anti-Semitic unless you're declaring it is because of them being a Jew. Is that correct? I'm just wanting people to understand that.
I mean, I was having a conversation last night with a colleague sort of about this issue. And you're a Christian and you're meeting a Jew for the first time. And if you're a very conservative Christian and you're meeting a very progressive Jew, you may think this is what all Jewish people think. And if that's what you believe, that all Jews think the same, right? That's a stereotype.
Sure.
Now, of course, you go and meet another Jew who's more conservative, and you sit there and say, okay, well, I'm Christian, he's Jewish, but, we share a lot of the same beliefs, ideology, political ideology. Then you meet another Jew who's a progressive Jew, very liberal. Now you say, oh, okay, so that Jewish person is, I think, totally opposite, but this other person, we share a lot of similarities. So you recognize like everyone, Jews are not a monolith. We have lots of different opinions. There's a joke, two Jews, three opinions. So there are differences. In the United States, Jews typically lean to the left, especially Orthodox Jews generally tend to lean to the right, and more conservative Reform and other Jews tend to lean towards the left. That's not exclusive, obviously, but that general idea, if there's a disagreement on policy, that's normal, right? That's fine. But when you're accusing the person of holding those beliefs for these ulterior motives, that's when it's crossing into anti-Semitism.
Sure. And I think probably the greatest example that we would see is a lot of people on the right have a particular way of viewing like George Soros because of the things that he funds. Now, there are no doubt people who speak about him as from an anti-Semitic view. And then there are other people who say, hey, I don't like that he funds this individual, that thing, this ideology, whatever. You just have to make sure, and to the listeners, just make sure you're separating that. And I guess maybe, and this is going to sound probably very simplistic to you, EJ, but I think for a lot of non-Jewish people, it is very hard to maybe get our minds around, if you will, the fact that Jewish people are not a monolith, more so than other groups. And I think a lot of that has to do with not understanding the various levels, if you will, of following Judaism, whether, from the Orthodox position all the way through the more progressive, people not understanding their neighbor. And then I think also just having a people group where the religion, the state, so many things seem to go together in a way that is hard for us to get our minds around. If that, I don't even know if that makes sense, but I do think it does explain why there is this idea of, well, all Jewish people must think this or they must think that or whatever. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Well, it does make sense, and it's a good thing to bring up for your audience, because it was similar to what happened when Donald Trump won the Republican nomination, and you're looking at all the evangelical Christian voters who voted for him. And Donald Trump is not the standard bearer for evangelical Christianity. And you say there were other very, more devout Christians that you would say, well, evangelical Christians, why would you vote for Donald Trump when you have others that are more like you? Well, it's because they're not just voting based on how devout you are to the Christian faith. That's not what Christian voters, you're voting on the economy, you're voting on border security, you're voting on crime issues. The Republican primary, what were people voting on? It wasn't based on how observant you were of your religion.
And then you're voting to stop Hillary.
Well, and for Jews, it's the same thing. A lot of times people say, well, President Trump did so much for the state of Israel. I would argue the actions that he took in support of Israel were unprecedented if you look at our history, Republicans and Democrats, right? For years, people talked about moving the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He did it. Now, some people say that some of his actions were too far, but you can't argue about how supportive his policies were towards the state of Israel. And they say, well, why don't more Jews vote Republican? Well, because Jews aren't voting based on Israel. Jews are voting based on, like all voters, how would this impact me? What are the issues I care about most? Is it social justice issue? Is it taxes? Is it immigration? There's all these issues, and everyone votes based on how they feel, not as the collective. And that's an important part when we talk about even going through this working definition examples. There's one specifically, accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the priorities than to the interests of their own nations, meaning American Jews. It's the dual loyalty, canard, that American Jews are more loyal to Israel than they are to the United States. And that is anti-Semitic. And those are the types of things that we need to look at people as individuals and not as a collective. And of course, that's beyond just Jews in general, where we have these problems that we just presume everyone from certain ethnic groups, certain race, everyone must think the same way, which is, ignorance and, just a lack of knowledge about who people are and why people do what they do. And that's the beauty of our country, is that you get people that may come from a place that thinks a certain way, but when you're exposed to new ideas, you're able to adjust your views, and no longer are you a monolith. You're part of the fabric of our country, which has very divergent views on many issues.
There's a few things on the list here that I think are classical examples that we're not going to spend a lot of time on unless you'd like to. Things like Holocaust denial. I think that now, granted, I've been out of school for a few years now, but I believe that for the most part, coming up, we were educated into understanding the reality of the Holocaust, the evil of that event. And so but no doubt there are still groups that attempt to do that. Accusing Jews of being responsible for wrongdoings committed by a single person, as you talked about. Accusing people of exaggerating the Holocaust. Accusing the double loyalty. I think that's an important one. Now, I do have a question, and that is it possible to claim that you are not anti-Semitic while also not believing that every people has a right to a place?
Well, to be anti-Semitic, what we're talking about, when we see anti-Semitism, I mean, there's this definition, but to put it really simply, and I wish I had at the beginning of this, maybe you can cut it into the beginning. Anti-Semitism in plain English is Jew hatred.
Sure.
That's what anti-Semitism is. It's hating Jews. Why? Because they're Jews. So when we talk about the Jewish state, and you say, well, I'm not anti-Semitic, right? I don't hate Jews. I love the Jewish people. I'm anti-Zionism. Zionism meaning the movement to reestablish Zion, right? The state of Israel. I'm against the Jewish state. Well, what is Zionism? Zionism is not something that began in the late 19th century with Theodor Herzl. That's what most people think of Zionism, that it's a modern movement. Zionism is this yearning to return to Zion, to Jerusalem. That is something that has been inherent to the Jewish people for 2,000 years since the destruction of the Second Temple and the Jewish people were dispersed. That is the identity of being Jewish. Zionism is integral to who we are as a people. So to deny the Jewish people the right to self-determination, it's not saying whether there should or should not be a Jewish state, because there is a Jewish state. It exists. If we were having this debate 75 years ago, 75 plus 1 week ago, because Israel is now celebrating its 75th birthday of the reestablishment of the state, then maybe you could have that question whether there should be a Jewish state. And you could say, I'm not anti-Semitic, I just don't think it makes sense. I can't get into that because, I'm not old enough to remember that time. But the reality is today there is a Jewish state. And there is only one Jewish state in the world. There are many Muslim states. There are many Christian states, while not officially Some are officially still on their books, even though they're not actively Christian states, but have state religions. This is the one and only Jewish state in the entire world. And yet, if you put it on a map of all the countries in the world and said which country is the biggest country in the world based on publicity, it would be Israel because of how much attention it gets. So denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination, to say that your anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And for your audience to understand, this yearning to return to Zion, that's based on the Bible. That's based on God's word. It's God's promise to the Jewish people. He didn't say this is a land that, I give you for 100 years. I'm not a biblical expert here, but I'm pretty sure there was not a time restriction on that promise. And so when you look at this idea of anti-Zionism, it is anti-Semitism, it is anti-God, it is anti-Bible, it is anti-biblicalism, if you will. This is the denial of God's word. So when we look at it from a biblical perspective, I think it's quite clear. And when we look at it from this example under the definition of anti-Semitism, again, to declare that the state of Israel is a racist endeavor, that it's an apartheid state, it is the exact opposite. The most recent government prior to this current one included an Arab party. Well, it's kind of hard to make an argument of being an apartheid country when your government has the so-called, your government has the minority party as part of their governing coalition.
How many of Israel's neighbors have a Jewish member of the cabinet?
Right. Although I don't know if there's many. I can say one I know in Bahrain, and that's an interesting thing that's been developing lately. Is this openness, which is why they're also part of the Abraham Accords, this recognition that Jews are not an enemy and the Jewish state is not your enemy. The Jewish state, Israel, puts their hands out to work with its neighbors. And now, thankfully, some of their neighbors are putting their hands out to meet Israel.
Absolutely. And the Abraham Accords have been huge, and I think they're not just big for, of course, speaking Donald Trump and using the word huge, but they're not just a big accomplishment for the people of Israel or just for Jews. That is an accomplishment that has changed the current trajectory of world geopolitics. Just the idea that it wasn't, this idea that you have to deal with the Palestinians before you can deal with all these other states. What an amazing breakthrough in foreign policy. But we could nerd out on that all day. Let me pull the cover off for those of you that are listening, and let me give you the reasoning behind this conversation today. In order for us to have a worldview that is biblical or that is correct or that is anyway consistent, we have to recognize anti-Semitism. From the biblical perspective, God plainly said, I will bless them that bless you. I will curse them that curse you. I wanted each of you to be able to hear what anti-Semitism was so you can recognize it where you may not have seen it. And so for many of you, just be careful as you're out there navigating the web and navigating things. I recognize we can't trust all the sources that are out there in media and so on and so forth, but there is a lot of anti-Semitism that has come out through the various groups that are pumping out information, some of which you may have thought you could agree with, but at the end, they're going back to the trope of it's the controlling Jew behind the scenes. It's be careful with those things. Vet your sources. Pay attention to what politicians are saying. And they're not all going to stand up and do what Rashida Tlaib did a few days ago, Tlaib, I believe, but did a few days ago. But they are going to say things that are going to reveal where they stand on Israel. And as we have heard today, there's a working definition accepted by the world. I would challenge you to go over to the HolocaustRemembrance.com, and there you can find it. You can Google the IHRA anti-Semitism definition, and you will be able to find this definition so you can apply it to your life. This is, again, I would say it's a matter of biblical fidelity, as far as if you are a Christian. Obviously, if you are a Jew, you are going to recognize anti-Semitism. But if you are a Christian and you're attempting to follow God's law in your life, you want to recognize this. You want to recognize where it's happening around you. If you are not a believer, but you are simply a conservative American that is looking for a way to have a consistent worldview, then you need to recognize the attacks on sovereignty, the attacks on the individual. All of these things are anti-Semitism is extremely an anti-Western ideology because it's putting people into groups. The philosophy is terrible. The ideology is terrible. The religious merits are terrible. It is all bad, but I think many of us couldn't recognize it. And that's why I wanted to have EJ on today to help us understand, because as I sat listening to him just a few weeks ago, as he was making a presentation to a group of pastors, it hit me that so many people are not recognizing, because all we have seen is the traditional anti-Semitism, and we're not recognizing how that a people that we believe are God's chosen people, how we believe a people that God has said his mark of blessing is upon them, and how we treat them affects our trajectory in life. That was shown to me in that room, that, hey, a lot of the folks I know are not seeing this. They're only seeing these major things. And anti-Semitism today may show up in the form of a swastika spray painted on a building. That's possible. But many times it's going to show up in these subtle ways, and it's important for us to pay attention to it. EJ, we've only got a few minutes left. I know you've got a lot going on up there trying to keep the city of DC running, but perhaps you can help us, give us some positives, and then tell us how we can be better neighbors to our Jewish fellow citizens and our fellow Americans during this American, in fact, tell me what the month is again. Yes. Help me out with that.
Jewish American Heritage Month. So I would urge everyone listening to visit our website, combatantisemitism.org. Visit the website, sign up for our newsletter. You will get information, good and bad, of what's happening in the world. And you can learn more about Jewish American Heritage Month, which is this entire month of May. And what I would urge and ask all of you today is, if you're listening today, please tell a friend, a neighbor, just make a phone call and say, did you know that today is Jewish American Heritage Month? That the month of May is Jewish American Heritage Month. Inform one other person and ask them to inform one other person that it's Jewish American Heritage Month. If you've got a platform, if you're a pastor, if you've got an organization that you could put out a memo to your congregation, to your employees, just letting them know that the month of May is Jewish American Heritage Month, to spread this knowledge to people so that they are aware of the fact that this month exists. And from a positive message to all of you listening right now, and to you, Patrick, first of all, again, thank you so much for having me on. It is these types of opportunities and these conversations that are so important for people to hear and to have, which is a hard thing today in the United States. It's hard to have conversations about topics that at times can become contentious, at times can be uncomfortable, but that's how we grow. That's how we learn. That's how we continue to evolve into a more just and better society. And I would just, share that even in the U.S. Congress on April 27th, we, the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, hosted an event to kick off Jewish American Heritage Month. We had 14 senators and members of the House of Representatives in attendance, including half were Democrats. So this is not an issue that is partisan, but there are certainly people on both sides, on the extremes, that try to monopolize and take control of the narrative to make it seem like this is a divisive issue. There is unity that this needs to be combated and it needs to be resolved. And that's what we're doing at the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement to help do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, EJ, for taking the time to join us today. Thank you to everyone who has listened. EJ, any other websites or ways to follow you that you want to throw out?
Well, you can follow us. We're on all social media apps, Facebook, Twitter, and all the other ones that I'm just unfortunately not familiar with. I work more on the policy side, helping to educate members of Congress on this, but please visit our website. We have a huge resource of information. You can see all of our partner organizations and reach out to us. We would be happy to have any of your organizations become a partner with us. We have over 650 partner organizations from around the world, and you can sign up and join our movement today as individuals as well.
So get over to combatantisemitismmovement.org.
No movement. Combat Anti-Semitism.
You're right. You're right. Get over to Combat Anti-Semitism. I was about to send you to the wrong place. combatantisemitism.org and check out the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement and get more information there. Once again, EJ, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Patrick.
And to everyone else, I hope that today has been more than a conversation for you.
Thanks again for being part of More Than a Conversation today. If you'd like more content like this, check out my blog at www.pastorconley.com. That's PASTORCONLEY.com. Again, that's pastorconley.com. I'd also love to see you join us in worship at Garden Sanctuary. If you're ever in Rock Hill, South Carolina, or the greater Charlotte area, we'd love to have you stop by and worship with us. Check us out at www.gardensanctuary.org. That's gardensanctuary.org. Until next time, I hope this has been more than a conversation.